And that's 2023 in the books. The season officially over, and Abu Dhabi's race may not have come down to the wire for first place. We've had enough of that. But the remainder of the grid fought hard to claim every last point they could, even down to the last lap today, with Mercedes clinching second in the Constructors from Ferrari by just 3 points, and McLaren claiming fourth ahead of Aston Martin. I'm Martyn Lee from the Autosport podcast, and joining me from the track is Matt Q, and here back in the UK is Sam Hall. Welcome both. Right, we'll kick things off then, Matt. I'll come to you first. Max Verstappen closes out the year with another dominant win, making it look easy after struggling at the start of the weekend. Actually, wasn't even in the car at the beginning of the weekend. At 19 wins, over 1,000 laps led. And his boss, Helmut Marko, even betting that he wouldn't be on the front row to start this one. But Christian Horner won that bet. Any chance, Matt, that Max wouldn't have finished this year in style?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to start by saying, hopefully Marko didn't spend too much time in the casinos in Las Vegas, because obviously it's a good job he's got €500 to lose on very regularly for betting against Max Verstappen. I think there was a small chance initially because Leclerc did give it a go. So that Ferrari in the early laps, and we know time and time again, what does Verstappen do? He leans into those Pirelli tyres. He doesn't excite them or jolt them. He gets them warmed up gradually, and so they're sort of in their happy place. And then he can stretch them out for longer. That's been his trademark this season. So there is always that couple of laps window early on where he's vulnerable. We've seen it with Norris in Brazil, for example, where he can be got at, and then as Pirelli's are sorted, and he just bolts into the distance. So in that window, Leclerc feasibly could have gone after him, made life a bit more difficult. But they're just not bothering to go after Verstappen, are they? Norris a few times this season has choked when push comes to shove, and Leclerc just doesn't race him at the minute. He just gives him all the space in the world to go through. We saw, for instance, Verstappen, I think it was versus Sainz into turn one in Austin, takes him right up to the pit wall. When Leclerc has the opportunity to do that in Brazil, he just leaves the door open, waves him through. Same again on the run to turn 6 today. And I get it. Pirellis are so subject to thermal degradation that, you need to play the long game, let them go, not overheat them. And obviously Ferrari had their eye on second place in the Constructors Championship, so getting engaged with Verstappen, potentially coming to blows or rolling your tyres, not worth it. But they just let him streak through. So from that point onwards, I'm sorry, but yeah, Verstappen was always going to win that. He was always going to win that.
Yeah, quick follow-up, if I may, Matt. It seems interesting that last time out in Vegas, it was the reverse. It was the situation reversed. So you had Verstappen up the inside into turn one and just brake later and later, pushed off Leclerc, got a penalty, but he also had track position and ultimately didn't really make any difference. Whereas this weekend, we saw Leclerc get the inside line, could have been, act in bad faith and push Verstappen wide if he'd wanted to and take avoiding action, but he doesn't. He races very clean, races very fair. They have a lot of respect for each other, but some would say almost lacking a killer instinct. Would you agree with that?
It's difficult to say right now because the stakes are so much, or they're lowered so much. If we think back to the start of 2022 when they were going sort of hammer and tongue for those DRS detection battles, and Leclerc was, initially at least in those outwitting Verstappen, and he was always sort of fair and robust and aggressive when he had to be, not to the limit that we've seen Verstappen throughout recent years, whether it's versus Hamilton in 2021 or numerous occasions this season when someone has had a sniff. But context is everything. The Ferrari is not quick enough. I think the really frustrating thing for me is that they're now broadcasting their intent. In Austin, Leclerc said, Verstappen will go by and there's no point trying to fight him and whatever. And you see that because everyone lets him through because they don't want to ruin their tyres. That is one contributing factor of why Hamilton wasn't able to win that. He was the quicker car on the final sprint and gets close, but can't because everyone's welcomed Verstappen through. So those 2 seconds doesn't gone. Today, case in point, there was audible groans in the media centre when Verstappen came to out the pits to overtake Sainz. That in that moment, okay, not in the context of the entire race, but in that moment, that is a battle for track position. Sainz, at least move your car half a foot to make it look like you're trying to delay him. But no, it doesn't. And you don't know necessarily with safety. I'm not saying it's worth, braking late, flat spotting a tyre, or overdriving and killing the tyres. But you don't necessarily know how a safety car is going to interrupt the race. I'm sat in front of Latifi corner, as affectionately known. You don't know how those episodes will affect the race, but Verstappen's just allowed through. But like I say, I understand that is a pragmatic thing in terms of teams looking after their tyres, focusing on bigger picture. There's $10 million up for stake with that Ferrari-Mercedes battle. But as the reason I'm sat here and all my colleagues sat here, the reason we're all watching talk about it now is because fundamentally we are fans. We work in Formula One, or whatever. Secondly, we're all fans, like the people watching this video. So we want to see a good battle, and yet again we've been denied that, sadly. I feel anyway.
Yeah, okay. And on the team radio as well, Leclerc was absolutely gutted afterwards as well for missing out on the constructors. A real team player. Sam, let me ask you a little bit about Red Bull and Sergio Perez finishing second on the road, but not on the podium because of a 5-second penalty for earlier contact with Lando Norris, a real low-speed, clumsy one. What happened there? Was it the right decision? And why was he then given a warning or a reprimand, if you like, afterwards by the stewards for what he said on the radio as he was coming in?
Yeah, I'll deal with the second part first, because showing the time that we're recording this, we've actually had that document drop, and it is a warning, not a reprimand. They're probably different things in the FIA book of punishments, probably. Apparently, Checo has made a genuine and sincere apology to each of the stewards and explained that he made comments in the heat of the moment and did not consider the fact that they would be broadcast and the impact of that. So basically, on his cooling down lap, he made some comments about his view of the penalty that he got, that he shouldn't have got a penalty. He said it in probably a way that definitely a way that he shouldn't have done, and the stewards took a dim view to this, hence the formal apology. And he's been given a warning for this, nothing more, just a slap on the wrist. So going back to the original penalty, it was a 50-50, I thought. Basically, he was overtaking Lando Norris at turn 6, just after the first DRS zone, the long back straight. Got his car fully down the inside, but he didn't entirely make the apex. Didn't make the apex at all, really. And contact was made with Lando Norris's car. It didn't look like he opened the steering so that he would run Lando off the road. He left over a car's width on the outside. Yes, he was taking more track than Lando would have expected. But Lando then made the decision to, rather than have a real tight turn 7, he would run across the runoff and take the advantage. So really, both drivers did something that was wrong. Both drivers could have acted to avoid it. So if that isn't the definition of a racing incident, then I'm really a bit lost as to what is a racing incident. Not everything needs a penalty. Not everything needs someone to be blamed for it. So yeah, I think Perez can be possibly forgiven, and I think that's been taken into account by the FIA there for his frustration. And I don't think you'd find many people that wouldn't be frustrated at losing a podium because of that.
Absolutely. Well, talking about losing positions or not because of penalties, Charles Leclerc tried to do a little bit of dancing with Sergio Perez and George Russell. He put up a solid fight at the beginning of the race. There's a cracking first lap or two, actually, before he dropped back from Verstappen. But head to the other end of the Grand Prix. And at the end, so Charles Leclerc knew that Perez was sitting on a 5-second penalty and then decided to let him pass because he was battling with Russell. And of course, the big second place in the Constructors Championship. It kind of worked, but ultimately it didn't. What happened there, and ultimately what went wrong, Matt, in that whole kind of coordinated thing that didn't quite happen to secure second in the Constructors?
Yeah, so Ferrari are a bit more open with their drivers than Mercedes was with theirs. They were, they'd spoken to Leclerc and said, these are not quite gone into the detail of the permutations, but this is essentially what is required to wrap up second in the Constructors Championship. Whereas Mercedes said, Russell, just crack on with it. And there was certainly some discussion in the commentary I was leading to whether that was a bit of a, it's the final race of the season. Give these drivers, let them know what the cards are so they can play with those if you like. But yeah, so Leclerc, what he's trying to do, I guess, almost copying his teammate by trying to organise a race from the cockpit, but he wanted to effectively let Perez by and then let him get 4 seconds clear of Leclerc, because that means Leclerc will get second place back at the line when Perez serves his penalty, but the little sort of offset means he then finishes third and Russell is bumped back to fourth rather than what actually happened, which is Perez is allowed by, Leclerc finishes third on the road, gets bumped up to second, but Russell was close enough behind to get third place. So that was what the offset was. So if Leclerc makes that work and Russell is fourth, then I think they draw on points, the two teams, but Ferrari would get that second place in the Constructors Championship, the extra $10 million because of that one non-Red Bull win in Singapore. So that's how it worked, but obviously didn't quite pay off. Yeah, so and then it didn't matter, as we saw out on the final lap where Hamilton dived up the inside of Tsunoda, had a snap oversteer, and then Tsunoda came back past in the final laps for ninth place. Obviously that snap bit of oversteer, just as Hamilton does something good late in the race, snap bit of oversteer, isn't that a snapshot of the W14 this season, letting go just whenever sort of it's called upon. So that was the thinking behind Leclerc's manoeuvre, but ultimately didn't pay off.
Okay, Sam, let me ask you about teammate Carlos Sainz. Now, it's been a season of highs and lows. He got his second Formula One win, but then we have a race like today where he's battling through the field. What happened with Sainz' race, and why didn't he rejoin at the end from his pit stop?
Basically because he had nothing to race for. They were holding out for a safety car or a red flag, and they didn't exactly make this a hidden thing from quite early on. The only reason he was really running out quite high up the order was because he was out of the sort of regular pit stop shuffle. So he was taking advantage of that. Yeah, eventually Ferrari just went, well, a safety car's not coming, is it? He's not going to make any difference. He came out of the pits and was in P16 or sort of P18 earlier on. He actually is classified as finishing P18 anyway. But he just didn't have the pace all weekend. Obviously didn't take part in FP1. Robert Schwartzman was in his car and then crashed 8 minutes into FP2, as we discussed on Friday. And that ultimately cost him. He just didn't have any pace. Fred Vasseur, team principal Ferrari, didn't blame that for the reason as to why Ferrari didn't get second in the championship. He said, sort of, ignore this race. This isn't where it happened. We had reliability and other issues elsewhere in the season, and that's where we lost this. You can't pinpoint it as being here.
Matt, let me ask you about eyewear in the pit lane. So 6 drivers it's just nothing that the drivers did, but Abu Dhabi is a dusk race and the sun sets over the course of the race. What was the deal with our colleague Philip Clearon wrote this one up, that the eyewear could have led to some sort of penalty?
Yeah, so we haven't had an exact explanation as to whether it's to do with tints or effectively cooling. So as you know, dusk race, under the FIA sporting regulations, certain material or clothing is specified, the standard of fireproof overalls, the crash helmet, and also the eyewear. So that doesn't mean like protective goggles as such, it's the visor on the helmet. And the race director, Niels Vitic, reported during the race several cases, or had them looked at, whether the pit crews had them open, basically. So that could be for visibility, because it is, like you say, the setting sun, or to do with heat, because they're perspiring so much. The marshals in the pit lane who monitor the pit stops reported these back, and video evidence has been reviewed. Now, I understand that when this was first brought to light, team bosses were pretty furious, basically because there's no prior warning of it. A bit like the jewelry thing, almost. It's just popped up onto the agenda suddenly, and I think they thought they were all going to get end of season with a fine that would come out of the Christmas party kitty and basically top up the FIA's own little pot. As it happens, they've looked into it. All team representatives, so never mind pausing for the end of team photo and whacking open the champagne. All team representatives, so sporting directors, were summoned for a meeting, and basically they've had it stress the importance of safety and the right material, but in a decision it doesn't say anything about fine. So it's back to where you were in terms of renting out the karaoke machine and the fondue set, I think.
I'll stay with you, Matt, for final thoughts on today's Grand Prix and how it was as a finale to this 2023 season.
A fitting reflection of the season, wasn't it? It was not, for large swathes of that Grand Prix, it was not an exciting contest, to the point where it looked like second place in the constructors might be decided by some eyewear issues. Like that's what we're not necessarily grasping onto, because you don't want battles and $10 million worth of prize money to be settled that way. But there was so little to grasp onto. And unfortunately, it was a perfect snapshot. This track is not good for overtaking. It's a season finale because of money. That's the reality of it, because of a commercial agreement. It's come at the end of a long, grueling season. Not a good track. And then you have DRS trains and thermal management of the Pirellis. And a dominant Red Bull. That's what you've had all season. So, that banner that did the rounds on social media at the bottom of the pit lane, it says no ordinary season. The only that works. It's not an ordinary season because it's been worse than normal. It has been boring. And last year, not only did we have the new rules and a battle for between Leclerc and Verstappen initially, but we had great off-track politics, a bonkers silly season. Oscar Piastri, who's he going to drive for? The cost cap, etc., etc. This, even the politics has been pretty naff. Okay, a bit of good tension between the FIA and FOM, and I think people should note with intrigue how well AlphaTauri have done in these recent races, and teams are very complimentary towards that flaw that could well feature on another car at the start of next season. So there is a bit of tension at the end of the season, but otherwise it's been pretty drab, doesn't it? And not to ramble on too much, but it's left people asking, like I went to the Toto Wolff question, and the final question that Toto Wolff pretty much had to answer is has F1, is it coming down the other side of the hill now? The Red Bull dominance, like it or not, will impact ticket sales for races. They are based on the season before, so next season there may be a dip in ticket sales. And F1 used to be when everything was increasing, when everything was going up and up, F1 was very open and public about its TV viewing figures. Now it's more willing to push its social media figures, and maybe something should be read into that, why one metric has overtaken the other. So I hope that Mercedes, Aston Martin, McLaren, Ferrari, whoever can take the fight to Red Bull, because F1 needs it, and we as audience and fans need it as well, and possibly deserve it after the commitment in terms of time, number of races getting bigger. We deserve something in return, maybe.
Absolutely. Same question to you, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know what to add to what Matt was saying there. I suppose he was really going with the glass half empty, so I'll go glass half full, even though I agree with pretty much everything he said. It was a fitting finale that it did surmise the season, where you had Max Verstappen winning by miles, actually a bigger margin than he enjoyed at the start of the season. But then behind him, you had some brilliant action. Yes, you had the degradation of tyres, you had DRS trains, but you had overtaking. George Russell, was it Oscar Piastri that he was struggling for about 3-4 laps, battling DRS zones, trying to get past? You had good racing in the lower order, but this is the problem. People, and I was told this in the previous job, people generally don't care about second and below. It's who's winning. You don't remember the team that came second, the driver that came second. So we need that battle at the front. Otherwise, as Matt rightly says, we could be coming down the other side of the hill. You can't say F1 can't survive another season like this, because of course it can. It's happened before. I mean, you look at the years of Schumacher domination, the years Hamilton domination. Fair enough, this is on a completely different level to that domination, but F1 can survive a dominant team and driver. We just need a bit more competition, and then, maybe 2 races next season a different team wins. We'll start small.
And that does it for Abu Dhabi and 2023 in Formula One. Thank you both for joining me. If you like what we do here, give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you never miss these videos. We've got season reviews and a lot more coming before the end of the year. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.